thank you all for coming. It's been a really great night. I kind of want to start a panel just like questions. Let's fire them off. If not, I'm going to treat it like a campfire. Like we're all kind of sitting down here, ready to take some questions. Fire ahead if anybody got questions. I never had questions at the beginning. I will run around with a microphone if I'm ready.
Don't be shy.
I saw in Canoa there's a CO2 equivalence. Where do you get that data from? Is it from some EPG?
Ah, great question. So in our effort to arm the designer with as much information as they need or data as they need to make decisions, we carbon equivalents, of course, are a big deal. And unfortunately, the industry doesn't have a lot of EPDs. We measured something that less about than 3%, 3 to 4% of products even have an EPD. An EPD is an environmental product declaration. It's an ISO standard that OEMs or would call it equipment manufacturers, but really anybody who makes furniture, lighting, equipment has a process by which they can go through to declare every single thing that a product is made for. So every material, every process, et cetera. And I know, unfortunately, in commercial furniture, the amount of EPDs is very low. So what we ended up doing was we created our own. So what we do is we take a couple of different ways of calculating carbon at the industrial design level at that scale, and then we apply it to all of the products that we have. So whether you publish an EPD or not, we're able to serve you that information. Of course, it's 100% an estimate. Like the actual real information would still come from them, but because it's furniture, 30 kilograms to 32 kilograms is not necessarily an issue from a decision-making perspective. So we're always working on making that better. But every time that new products come online, we run the script. The new information comes up, and that's information that we enrich that product with that information.
I think you have a real chance of advocating for that because a lot of bigger architecture offices are actually looking into
Yeah.
meeting, or at least what's the word? Well, the energy code is becoming more stringent, and
So,
there's also
yeah.
sustainability wise. There's the climate. What's the name of that?
So many of let's say we started with commercial, whether it's hotels or retail or workplace or whatever. Many of these companies that own those spaces and operate those spaces have really stringent ESG requirements. Yeah, and so ESG requirements at a corporate level, say you're, I don't know, like McDonald's or Starbucks or you're Marriott, you've stated that you want to cut demolition waste, you want to start measuring and publishing your carbon, your carbon emissions. And a lot of focus in our industry is around operational carbon, or like really what the carbon is that we use to operate these spaces, and very little of it is focused on embodied carbon. So the carbon numbers you see on our platform are embodied. It's product. It's embodied product. And so as you're making design decisions, not only can you see price and lead time, you should also see the actual embodied carbon normalized across all these product lines.
Just a quick thing on this, I would absolutely kind of encourage and challenge tools like Arcole and others to start considering things like embodied carbon as part of the design process. We're spending a lot of time in similar spaces. We're running into the fact that we are across 5 different regions, so EPDs are inconsistent across each of those regions. We can use certain types of resources, like University of Bath has a particular resource around carbon. There's a few other kind of academic institutions that have this, but it's really hit and miss. And the hope is that we continue to have more product manufacturers, both in terms of furniture and furnishings, but also kind of core products that go into standard kind of architectural build construction, provide EPD information. We also, though, I think run into a problem, and again, this is a place where look over at Paul again. There's an opportunity here. Is that is that we have tools that are good for later stages of design. So when you're in Revit and later kind of delivery parts where you can use things like EC3 and others to calculate carbon, but that's the moment when you're actually specifying concrete mixes, right? But there's so many major decisions happening at the earliest stages of design that have a much broader and wider impact on embodied carbon in the project, well before you're having a conversation about what concrete mixes you're using. So there's a missed opportunity here for the early stages of the design process to consider comparative analysis between design schemes and the carbon impact that they have.
So one of the problems with the sort of environmental certification and quantification of the built sector, including the design piece, is that the governance of the sector is very poor in interfacing with national, in particular international institutions, right? There's tons of regulation around or international law emerging from the Framework Convention on Climate Change around carbon emissions, for example. But the built sector is poor at interfacing that and saying, give us standards, give us frameworks that we can cascade down to national legislation. REBA are crap at that stuff. They should be much better. And so what ends up happening is you have companies trying to innovate their way to contribution here. I mean, one of the best examples of this, which no one knows about, but it was huge. They put millions of dollars into it. Was a thing called Flux Quartz. Like Flux was this kind of like design automation platform thing that span out of Google about 10 years ago. One of their sub-projects was a thing called Quartz, which was attempting to be like a normalized reference EPD system for the entire construction industry from an early stage. So you had like reference samples that you could use to build out your sort of life cycle assessment, but collapsed without a trace after millions of dollars spent because it just is too much work. It needs to have government expenditure, regulation, intervention to make that work, and the industry is not asking for interfacing with it, and that itself is tragedy, right? So you're asking for EPD stabilization, and when Fed's doing it, the amount of work he's taking on his shoulders is fucking immense and should not be the work of a venture-backed company. It should be a government-funded, industry-wide exercise that you can accelerate and benefit from.
Yeah, I'll give some props to the U.S. government, which I forget which bill it was included in, but there is actually at the moment I think somewhere to the tune of $200 million available for product manufacturers to declare, and the government will give that money back. An EPD for a chair can cost up to $10,000 to actually do, so it's a very expensive certification. Sure, if you make it. But chairs are famously like movies. There's only like 1% of them that actually sell more than 2 or 3. So they're easy to think up, if you will, but they're really hard to manufacture at scale and to actually make it.
As long as I have my voice. Quick question for Jacob. Jacob from Harvard? Yeah. You highlighted, is that right?
From Boston.
You said Harvard a bunch of times.
Yeah, no, you got it. I actually don't think I did. It was on the screen. But yeah, I live in Brooklyn. Yeah.
So your graphs that we couldn't read highlighted a bunch of difference between the student culture, which I think most of us came from, and the working culture, which most of us find ourselves in to live. Whose job is it to bridge that gap?
Yeah, that's frankly like the first slide I showed that showed basically kind of that kind of path or gap between school and licensure, right? It's the industry that's filling that gap. And I think that's something that we need to really think hard about across the entire profession and really across the discipline of architecture is like what are the things that are best learned really are only going to be learned in practice? What are the things that no one's going to pay you to learn? It should be learned in school, and how do you bridge those? There have been various models put together. There was some talk in the 80s actually about creating models where you actually had students essentially paying tuition, which was going to subsidize them working in firms. There's obviously, and there's some famous programs like Cincinnati, schools that have co-op programs that are actually quite successful. And exactly, and that's like they kind of do. I think actually that's the closest thing I think we have to a model that really does that. There've been more, there were people pushing for actually a more extreme version of that, where you would actually spend extended periods in work. Then there's like the British model, where you have a part 1 and part 2, and you work between them. But I think this is something we really need to be talking much more openly about, is our current model, which everything is gravitated to, which is the kind of MArch, as a terminal degree, is that really the right one? And there's a whole history of why schools moved from BArcs to MArcs, and that actually is a shift that happened in the 70s around, kind of an arms race in degree programs, and people discovered, MArcs were both more profitable for schools, and also because the students were more mature, they ostensibly needed fewer numbers of teachers per student, and there's been pressures that have created a prevalence of MArch programs, and now you're seeing the emergence of PhDs in architecture, which is a whole other thing to talk about. So, there's been this kind of creep, which I think really needs to be talked about.
Thank you.
I have a question. So, this is two parts. The first part, specifically for Cole, is: do you imagine it as a tool that is specifically for the user base of architects, or do you kind of envision it being a tool where, in the future, it's something that architects might use with other stakeholders in the process, like their clients, like structural engineers? And I guess another question on top of that for the broader group too is: do you think AEC tools should be specifically designed for the specific niche of architects, or do you think they should have some kind of functionality where it empowers people who come from non-design backgrounds to be able to participate in the design process?
Yeah, I mean, you asked a really easy question for us in terms of it's a great lead on for me to really sell Arcole. We are wholly based around what you just asked. I mean, yes, we are targeting architects. Yes, in the future, we want to include M&E and all the other stakeholders at a technical level. But in the short term, the whole beauty of being browser-based, I mean, that hashtag demo we did at the very end of hey, open this up on your phone, that's the whole idea. Anybody should be able to have access. It should be very easy to share a project with somebody to get feedback. The whole workflow around sheet sets that we showed, being able to send a link to somebody and say, hey, just comment on this. You don't need to install Bluebeam. I don't want an email with a whole list of feedback that I need to action. Let's have the conversation directly in the tool and just go ahead and open it. Yeah.
I mean, so I have this conversation with these guys probably every 6 months, right? I'm saying, are you ready for all the non-fucking architects to be your power users and to spin this thing up? And my view is, if you look at Figma, for example, right? Figma started as some kind of sort of replacement with simple feature set for Illustrator, like a vector editor, right? But they basically kept on adding features that were not in a linear growth path towards adding out or building out all the Illustrator features. They added prototyping, which isn't really in the Illustrator feature set. You can kind of mash it up, but it's not exactly what it does. And now they've got code development. You just switch your whole thing into code, so you're killing Webflow. And so these are all parallels, and I think that's what's going to happen in spatial design. The Treasury, which is the company I started 18 months ago, the premise of Treasury is that the spatial computing revolution, whether Metaverse or Apple's Vision Chip or whatever it may be, movie production is going to have a vast need for well-designed spatial assets, fully modeled spatial environments. Now, I think that a fraction of those within a few years will become from formally trained architects. There'll be spatial designers that are as good as architects, and then what will happen is there'll be essentially architects of record shops that pull in good designs from anybody and build them out. I cannot believe that the architecture profession is going to be these 8-year fucking people with $30,000 salaries after 8 years of study, when coders are getting $200,000 with a 6-month boot camp. Do you think the economic incentive is going to stand up if digital design is the starting point and construction design is the niche? No, it's fucked. And that's one of the main things you want to talk about in architecture tooling development is the money is going to smash all this shit out of the way. And it will be the disruption vector for Autodesk. The licenses will go. So your question, what about these non-architects that are going to do spatial design, is the big one. And that's what all these conversations are going to be over, in my view.
So we haven't got to argue in a long time. I didn't know John until I knew I was arguing with on Twitter, but that was 18 months ago. But
that's how everybody meets.
Yeah, apparently. I am horrible at names. But I have a slightly different take. I actually could care less about that last part of the conversation, but the reason I actually said that what Fed is doing, it looks from a tooling perspective, is interesting to me, because that actually looks like a pleasant experience. And from our, at least from my perspective, the specific question of mini apps, I mean, was wondering where Daniel Davis is, because he's the guy that said that we're all going to have a horizontal, like an app for everything. Well, I work for a big company. We do everything, so I have to have an app for everything. Well, then we want to make that really good user experience, and you want to, like, from a tooling perspective, you want a two-person bootstrap company to make something useful. The only way that's going to be possible if that data can flow much more simply. So this is like the connecting all the dots. Whether that will happen, I don't know. Whether it was be really confusing that you have to use 5 tools to do your job, or one tool that's really hard, I don't know. But I think, at least from my perspective, there are so many niches to fill, big or small, that we actually need to support that happening. I am not a fan of a venture model for most of the problems we have in our industry. It just has not helped us long term. Everybody gets bought out, and then the quality of the tool disappears, or the price of the tool that was affordable goes away. So this is like big picture. I think these are the things we need to care about.
So I think coming back to your question about, what is the tool set that an architect's going to be using? I think the question comes down to, what do we define as an architect, I guess, going forward? So I've always had this perspective that a role of an architect is to take the kind of social and productive structures in society and the relationships that we have, and then turn them into some sort of space for us to interact with that. Is it a physical space? Is it a digital space? Is it something entirely different? It's an open question, right? So at that point, you start asking the question, well, what is an architect going forward? What is our role? What are the fundamental things that we're supposed to be providing? And the models that we have out there right now are entirely centered around an existing business model that is going to crumble and be broken apart into multiple different ways. So we have to have an extendable environment that can bring in people with different backgrounds and different interests who have maybe fundamentally the same goal and the same idea of creating spaces at which people interact and work with each other. But the method that you create it could be something entirely different. What I don't want to run into is that we as a profession are making effectively blank, empty structures of concrete and steel for other experienced designers to come in and put things into, right? That's what's happening, and that's increasingly what's going to continue to happen. So I think we have an opportunity as a profession to assert ourselves in our experiences, but in so doing, we have to redefine what our fundamental goal is.
So I'll stop. I won't say any more than this, but I want to say this one thing, because I think this will set up more conversation and whatever. The point is, I think we live in what I call the banana phone era of architecture, right? The banana phone era of telephony was when there's no more technical development to happen. It was a copper wire, and it was a magnetic resonator, and all it did was generate sound waves of a very simple frequency range. That was it. So what did you do to innovate? You created fucking banana phones. And what we have in the built sector right now, and architecture, is essentially banana phone design. Technically, in the sense of actual functional programmatic output, human health, human psychology, human aesthetics, the output is fucking flatlined. That's what we have. We have the banana phone era of design. And the reality is, if you look at where technical advance happens in the phone sector, what have we got? Black bricks that all look the same. And has one person in your friend group said in the last 10 years, I'm bored of the design of phones? You fucking have not. You have not. Because the experiences keep exploding. And architecture is going to be the same fucking thing. The reality is, go back in history, vernaculars were technical standards. Everyone fetishizes fucking design vernaculars, but in reality they were standards. And deviation from the standard was a novelty. The reality is the vernacular, the standard of construction and typology was what made the quality. The banana phone era is going to die, and we're going to get standardized construction, and all this bullshit about niches is going to go. I'm sorry, but it's the reality. Every single industry in history has created mass production that platformizes layer by layer by layer to create experiential quality. Historically, prove me wrong. And you can talk everything you like about all the niches and design features. They are all going to be layered in to standard construction techniques. Banana phone era of architecture is going to die. I will not say any more. That's it.
I mean, I was going to go back about 14 steps, maybe, but I think that a lot of these conversations are swirling around, obviously, the future of the profession and the future of architects in general. And as someone who got my master's, did all of the steps, and then eventually ended up being a product manager. I think there's a really interesting tension probably occurring in schools right now. So Jacob, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. It seems to me that rather than trying to bridge the gap between what we're teaching and what the profession is doing or what architects should be doing, there's all of this simultaneous rebranding of the architect as blank. The architect as product manager, the architect as furniture designer, the architect as app designer. And I just think it's a question that is particularly pertinent probably to this group about the things that we build and the people who they're for and how those things can be adaptable. And I think one strength that all architects have, no matter whether they're practicing or not, is that architects are very scrappy. Everyone has a workflow that they teach their friend. They know how to I went through 6 months of MArch without knowing how to live paint in Illustrator, which was hell. And everyone has a little tool, and we've interviewed thousands of interior designers at least, and they all use Miro. They love Miro, and they've hacked it. And it's a very exciting time, I guess is what I'm saying, about people trying to find their path. Which way are you going to go? Are you going to go straighter into the technical area? Are you going to go left and do design strategy or something? And the tools are going to kind of all be the same because you're going to hack them together for what you need specifically.
Can I respond? Or Michael, did you want to? No, I was going to say, I think that we will, I will wait my turn, and I will, yes. So a bunch of things. Margaret, you're absolutely right. There's so much rebranding discussions happening about, and not just within school. I think across architecture. I'm honestly I'm really bullish on buildings, right? I'm just. It sounds dumb, but honestly,
Are you working for big buildings?
I'm working
right
for big
now?
building now, exactly, and not the one that we all see in Architect. No. No, it's it's so tempting, because it's when anyone who's actually been on a site realizes, right, that no matter how much you try to optimize it, there's something about architecture and construction still resist so many forces that are everything else is trending towards. It is inherently not efficient once you actually are on the site, right? It is inherently not. It's not optimized in any way. It is inefficient. It is messy. It's the moment you start swinging a hammer on a site, you realize that no matter how well you plan things, you discover things that are just you didn't plan for, right? And that's a roundabout way of saying that I don't see that skill set going away anytime soon. I think there also is absolutely a set of skills and knowledge, independent of tools, right, that has existed for millennia. To bring buildings like this stuff into existence, right? And I also deeply believe in the impact this stuff has on life, for better and for worse. So that all sounds really cheesy and roundabout, but I'm just saying I don't see that fundamentally at threat or under threat in any way, and I don't see it going away either. I think that and part of why I wanted to actually just talk about the architecture school history stuff is just to emphasize, and I didn't really maybe drive this home, just what a blip any of this is in the context of the history of building and building culture. And I appreciate the point about vernacular. I think it's true, right? That if you look at even what we define as an architect is barely 100 years old. And I guess I'm just and great buildings and great spaces have been designed and created for thousands of years, right? So that's a roundabout way of saying that I deeply believe in that there is a body of knowledge and skills which are necessary and need to be learned in some way in order to bring this into being. And where I'm agnostic is just whether or not that has to be done by licensed professional architects, right? Who have studied a certain sequence of programs and have worked a certain amount of time. That may be, also frankly, and also importantly, delivered in a fee-for-services professional design services model. That may or may not be the best way to do it. And I'm totally fine if it turns out that's not the best way to do it. I'm totally interested and open to other alternatives. And if you look at all the professional literature, anyone read Pencil Points? It's kind of a deep cut, but you can find it. It's all digitized and online. Pencil Points, it's amazing. It was the original professional architecture publication. And it goes back thanks, that's time, right? So just look it up. You can find all the PDFs are scanned. I know someone did everyone a service by doing this. But you go back 100 years and you read and there's a lot of not great stuff you have to sort through, ignore a lot of language, a lot of other stuff. But if you read the letters to the editor and the debates within pencil points from 1910, they're having the same conversations about the profession of architecture. It's whether or not it's going to be able to survive, about fees, about nefarious contractors, all those same discussions are basically the same, just with a bit more dated language. And at some point you have to ask, if we've been having these same debates literally since the profession of architecture was created, well, maybe we should be starting to talk about other models. And I think you're seeing tonight, some examples of, I think my interest in technology is that I think advances in technology are going to bring about new models or new potential for new models for project delivery and design. And we'll see that then affect schools. I've talked enough, but that's kind of where my thinking is on this.
I'll add on to that, because I agree with what you're saying, but I think the thing that's not explicitly said is that for all of the pontificating and statements about the future is going to be, nobody's applying a time scale to what they're saying. No one's saying this will go away in 6 months, or education will change over the next 20 years, the next 2 years, next semester. And so until you can apply a time scale to it and understand how that change is going to occur, you're just talking. There's nothing really to it. And so I'd challenge people to put time to what you're saying.
Well, we'll say in education, you are seeing, just to finish one point really quick, education, you actually are seeing programs changing already, and you're seeing things even licensure timelines and all those things actually moving up right now. You're seeing actually people are getting licensed faster. Those changes are happening around the professional regulatory sections. So we can talk later about timelines for schools, because I don't know, I think that's actually really gnarly.
But if you take that specific example and you look at it, what does it require? It requires, in many cases, state laws to change. And there's 50 states. How long does it take to get 50 states to adopt a new law? Often it's at least 1 year to do one state. So to think that that's going to happen in 1 year is ridiculous, right? To think that it's going to happen in 5 years is pretty progressive. 10 years, maybe. 20 years, probably, very easily. But you got to be able to understand the inertia that's happening in the world and the way things are. You can apply it to, flying cars, electric cars. You pick your example where people banana phones. Things are going to happen. Yes, they're going to happen. But unless you can say when, or unless you can apply it to what you're going to do next week or next year, it's just a lot of talk.
Yeah, so as one of the pontificators, as the main pontificator, let me say that the incumbency tends to rest on the argument that we don't know how far change is going to happen. But let me distinguish durations of change from rates of change. Right, the old classic, in an exponentially growing lily pond, how long does it take before the last half of the pond is filled? 1 day if it's all doubling per day, right? So when you think backwards, and you look at the adoption curve of the iPhone and listen to what the fucking phone sector said when iPhone came out, exactly the same thing. All this shit has to change before anything can change. Essentially what you have to do is say, am I an incumbent looking to leverage inertia, or to believe in innovation? Because if you believe in innovation, you can find, particularly if you think you need fucking climate change scale transformation now, you simply cannot sit there and say, well, the pontificators, they're not giving you time frames. What I will tell you is this: rates of change are different from durations of change. So look for things that kick up exponential curves. And also, look for things that collapse onto simple solutions. If you want to be an architect, fuck 8 years of professional training. Just find an architect of record who will put your design on the fucking planet Earth. Immediately, 8 years have been saved. I cannot tell you how fast you will get things done, but you save yourself 8 years. All right? And so the point is, there are ways to navigate the realm of inertia if you're actually looking for transformational inflection points. It's not
I actually don't disagree with you, but you have to understand what you're saying.
Durations of change, rates of change. I think rates of change can be assessed. Durations of change, who knows?
Greg.
Greg, you just said that not so long ago that we're a firm that does everything, so we will need an app for everything. And I wonder if we should question that premise of how architecture is organized.
I mean, make a lot of money. This is the.
I'll get to my question, which is actually for Paul and the Arco folks, and John and Ben and Margaret on the Canoa folks, about how you all have thought about market risk. Let's assume that there's little to common risk and you can build what you want to build, but where you start in the market, because what I hear are different versions of like a vertical market solution. You have to pick a point, right, where there's either an acutely unmet need, which I see with Canoa, or a need that is met in the most frustrating of ways, which I see with like Arco and others, right? But like where you decide to start and how you think about building out.
Can I actually give you a real answer? So it's actually ties very well back to the previous conversation. What I sort of think is happening right now is firms of an HOK or these sort of things, we do everything, but we can't reuse our knowledge. That is bad for individual architects. That's good for big companies. So what we're looking for is, well, how do we reuse this knowledge? Is probably not going to help the individual architects. So like the conversation that's happening with the new president of the AIA, like helping every architect, even if they want to go into non-traditional, sort of roles for architects. That's fine for individual architects, but as a firm like us, we have a totally different problem. We don't, that's not something we need to support. We probably have a business model that wants to optimize on not hiring junior staff because we have expertise that we could sort of translate into tooling. That's the hope, at least. I mean, this is not a stated goal. This is just sort of, if you look at the landscape. So I think it's a very good question because we're becoming stratified and stretched, and there is no architect, that means the same thing to anybody, or a firm that means the same thing to anybody at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, your question of where do you start, right? I mean, we think about this a lot and have thought about this a lot. And I think we've come into even this event knowing that we've put out a lot of blog posts. We've been somewhat secretive about what we're doing. People have come in thinking we might be X and we're currently Y. All of that is part of the decision. And really what it came down to is, we started off Arco with it's Figma for BIM. And everyone got really excited. Oh, Figma for BIM, that's what we want. And then we said, okay, well, what exactly does that mean? What does everybody think that means? It's different to everyone, right? And so at the start point, it's not incidental that it's conceptual in our case. There's building blocks needed to be able to go towards BIM. That was very intentional. You're making a door family, you need to be able to sweep and extrude and apply parameters and all that stuff. But the start point, and I think the interesting thing even, Fed and the crew looking at interior designers as an underserved piece. What came out of our discussions is really lots of architects to this day using SketchUp and SketchUp and all these kind of tools being hacked, like what Margaret was talking about. There's tools out there that are being hacked. And so we're saying, well, you shouldn't have to hack this. You should be able to have a tool that's built for you. And then we'll grow into the whole Revit killer piece. So that's our thought on starting point.
I'll add one thought to that, which is that across the panel here, we have very different perspectives. Some are from the incumbents. It's a nice word. In the sense that those, if you have the 20th century architectural business model, which is fee for service, is proven. Do we like it? Do we not like it? Doesn't matter. The reality is that the market has optimized it over 100 years, and it has said that in boom times it's elastic and it can grow, and in down times it's elastic and it can shrink. And that is a benefit to it sucks for the individuals, but the firm survives. And so the firm sees it as a fundamental sort of part of its DNA. And the firms that have made it to the point where they can survive those boom and busts that exist naturally in the economy get to effectively sit back and watch. And then those of us who are a say VC-backed model, or bootstrap or whatever, basically get like 3 arrows. right? And like one of those arrows just has to hit dead on, because we don't have the time to observe. We don't have the time to sort of sit back and see what this recession did or that recession did or what happened in San Francisco or what happened in Tokyo or whatever. Like, we just don't have the time. And so the decisions that we make become fundamentally different because the intention behind them is different. The startup model, which is fundamentally creative and incredibly, incredibly fun, it's also super fucking scary, because really what we're doing is you walk into a dark room and you just feel your way in the dark until maybe you find a light switch. And many don't, ever. And that's it. And for anybody here who wants to go to a startup, that description should excite you. And if it doesn't, don't go there, because it's fucking scary. Like, every single day, it's like, we're gonna be billionaires and we're gonna be poor. Like, within 20 seconds of each other. and that's it. And so you have to come back to that place where you say, you know what? We love our craft. We love buildings. We love spaces. We love what they do to people. We love cities. And as such, we love working on the tools that help us do those things. I love tooling. I love working on the tools that we use to then design the spaces that we do. And that's what I get out of it. And at the end of the day, then it doesn't matter if you make it or don't make it. It ends up being that. And so again, the emotion, the incentive, the reasons by which we make these decisions, or where we start, which was your original question, is fundamentally different, because our goal, our optimization metric is, let's make sure we can get to do this for 5 years and 10 years and 20 years because it's super fun. At any given day, that's not the case.
I think there's also a lot of invaluable just sort of disposition in being really open-minded to who your users are. You never know.
I just had a random closing question. It's not meant to be ageist.
I love it. He's like, I'm going home. So.
This might not be the last one. Could we go down the line from either Paul or from Margaret or Marguerite? And can you tell us the first program you ever downloaded from the internet for free? This could be Napster. It doesn't even matter, man. So you logged on and you downloaded it. If you want.
From the internet is already
pre-internet. Are we saying World Wide Web or internet?
So the problem here is I'm 22. So mine was probably fucking Minecraft or something. Blender, probably. Blender. He's like 40, so he's...
You got to come back to me. I don't know right now. I'm going to think about it.
Do CD-ROMs count? We're not talking CD-ROMs.
We're talking, you probably had a 14.4 wah internet, you know, and then you downloaded something over the internet, and it was a file. It was a thing. World of Warcraft 1.
Why limit it to the internet?
Okay.
That's what they're all asking.
How would you expand that?
Well, like, could it be off of floppy disks or like a CD-ROM?
How did we reach out and touch someone? Yeah,
I know I was working with pirated versions of 3D Studio Release 4 for DOS. It would have been in 94, 95. And getting multiple copies with cracks that you would hand across the entire architecture studio.
The earliest thing I installed was on a cassette tape drive on a Commodore 64.
Yes! Right it.
It's like a microwave.
You had to press play on the cassette tape and wait till it finished loading.
There may not be pictures on the internet.
The first free thing, because I didn't buy, was probably a Wavy Navy 5 1/4 inch drive I copied from a friend of mine. But that is a Apple II. So, like, it's an odd question. You realize this.
Yeah, I'm like.
I appreciate that because,
Was it supposed to be free or no?
No, you paid for it.
Because the first thing you probably downloaded, like design related, that was not supposed to be free, was a pirated version of InDesign that a friend gave me so I could do a portfolio. And the first like free thing I probably got was Wolfenstein 3D like a long time ago, and that was not, yeah, that was actually free. Yeah, yeah. That was
Shareware, that was meant to be.
Shareware, freeware, we all access this freeware from the World Wide Web in a way that it was free when we were kids, the readmes and the .exes, but this was part of the culture we all grew up in, regardless of our age, and thank you, and we're all part of the same kind of technological democracy or adhocracy, and I just, that's why I asked the question.
I mean, to push back on you, I'm becoming an anti-technologist as I age. So like, I could care less about most of these things you're talking about at this time. I want to go like hang out in the woods and have a computer every once in a while.
Yes.
I don't want all these things around me. I was reminiscing to myself that wasn't it great before everything wasn't the same? Like all these things you're talking about are interesting topics, but they're what old people reminisce about.
Yes. This feels a little bit like Grandpa Simpson, old man yelling at cloud movement, right?
Get off my lawn. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll try to connect the dots to this.
Thank you.
We should be good. Something one of you guys said about like having these mega apps and having a really great user experience. I think that sort of represents a shift from where we were maybe 10 years ago when I was in architecture school, where it was all about giving the designer agency to craft their own tools, right? And I think there was some mention about like designing a platform and what that was sort of like. Part of the platform idea is that like you craft your own tools rather than wait for a venture-backed company to give you the ultimate solution to that. And I'm curious if you guys have any sort of feeling of where along the last 15 years did that shift sort of happen for you, where is that actually it's no longer about the scripting culture or the like hack your own solution that was really valued as maybe something like that was seen as giving the designer a lot of agency. So actually we need a shift into crafting a much better user experience.
Scripting what on what? Sorry, just to clarify, scripting what on what? Because in almost every case you're scripting something on a platform. Like you're not writing your own drivers, right? I mean, so the narrative that somehow we're all escaping from big tech is just wrong. It's always been wrong, right? All that happens is the lower layers just infrastructuralize, and they're free because you're being charged a fraction of a cent somewhere in the system through an advert somehow, right? This idea that we're all breaking out and we're all creating our own shit has never been correct. We all need electricity. Who the fuck's producing that? You're not cranking a handle to drive the electric power on your computer. Jesus Christ. All that happens is the infrastructuralization of the software just goes down the stack, and you think, look at me coding my own shit. It's just not true. It's never been true. Sorry,
I don't.
That's not the question.
No, that's not what he's
Thanks for getting
That's
started
not what he
again, by the way.
asked at all.
Good question. You got John kicked off again. 40 minutes.
No, I think part of the issue with this is that we're not talking about fundamentally creating an entirely new design platform. But what we're looking for is that design platforms are providing particular features that have ways in which you create geometry, communicate information, produce documents, whatever. And the method in which they do that may not be the way that you want to use in your particular tool. Some of them are a lot more open than others. You know, the work that you can do in Grasshopper versus how Dynamo can influence Revit are of an entirely different scale. To answer your question, though, there are certain types of things that we've been focusing on repetitive patterns that we see across our practice that people are trying to solve the same problem again and again. What we're trying to say is, well, you don't have to necessarily solve it at the same time. We can provide some abilities for you to get there. But at the same time, we never lose that conversation, which is we want to give you agency to also explore additional solutions. So whether that's providing the ability to peek under the hood, to tweak that tool yourself, or in creating the tool, we're also educating you on how to create your own and your own workflows that you want to have. So I have been finding that we can't do one or the other. If you just provide automation tools, you're going to be missing significant opportunities. Giving people the education and the agency to engage in their tools, to explore the design the way they would like to, and to produce the documents and materials and collaborate the way they want to is just as powerful, if not more powerful, than just creating some automation tools. So you end up having to do both at the same time, and they're part of the exact same conversation.
I I would add that everything's moving faster, too, and you know, I don't know about you guys, but we because we're focused on an underserved market, the user who was able to go into RhinoScript when that came about, and then eventually go into Grasshopper when that came about, and then take visual programming to a whole different layer, was a super user, right? That's not for everybody. And the everybody was still sort of left to try to figure it out. And so I think for us, the driving force, if you will, is that because the world at large, the business that we're trying to serve, requires us to move quickly, that, yeah, like the low-hanging fruit here for us is to effectively arm as many people as we possibly can with that good enough tool. You're always going to have the super users, and I'm, you know, as somebody who loves tooling, go nuts. But the rest of the crowd also need to be armed with better tooling. So that's, at least that's our focus.
Sorry, to be a bit polite to your point, right? The issue is this, right? Is that the mythology that opportunity and power has been taken away from technology users has always been wrong. The internet is the same open architecture as it always was. It's fucking TCP opening stack. You can write whatever you want on it. Microsoft opened up Visual Basic scripting ages ago. You could have embedded a sound file in your fucking Word files. No one did this. The reality is that the mythology of the empowered creator is a bad perversion of what users want and need. Even power users don't use this shit in the end because it's extremely inefficient. Write a script once, use a library, then you use a feature, then it's a standard layer of a product. So what I'm saying is, if we think as architects that what we're doing is empowering creators, actually what we're doing is fetishizing a certain very inefficient version of creativity. And actually, what we're not doing is liberating people's quality design skills. Who the fuck wants to write RhinoScript? The reality is that Dynamo still exists, Grasshopper exists. You can write a Rhino plugin at any point. We're speaking to Neil about in writing your own plugin. They'll help you do it. It's not closed off. It's a perversion of creativity. It's a niche that shouldn't be pushed on most creators. And so the reason I'm frustrated is not that you shouldn't do it or people can't do it. It's the wrong idea to project. And it isn't true, but it isn't open to people. People just don't want to do it. And they shouldn't have to do it if they want to create shit.
Well, and that's the entrance of...
I think, unfortunately, we've only got 10 minutes, so I don't have near enough time to tell you all the things I disagree with that conversation. It's definitely not the case we're pushing that on the entirety of creativity, but continually for the last 15 to 20 years, I've seen some cutting-edge work that has fundamentally transformed our industry and how we work in significant ways, coming from people who came entirely out of that environment. The idea of designer as tool builder. And I think there's a lot of people here who are also software developers who work for these companies that came from that exact same place. So yes, it's not necessarily democratized, and we expect every single person to do it, but there's absolutely a place for that and absolutely a place for that kind of innovation.
I agree.
Final question.
All right. And I'll keep it like simple and open-ended. What do you guys think about a Wikipedia model for building information?
Silence.
I don't know exactly what you mean.
So an open...
It's devil's in the details.
Like an open source, like repository of building information. We're talking about standards. We're talking about everyone, especially architecture firms, trying to be tech companies when they're not tech companies. There needs to be just like a central repository of building information. And we're talking about different standards. Everyone's got a standard. Like why, we're talking about venture-backed models. Why does the Wikipedia model not work for everybody?
I love the idea. The concern is that there are so many architecture practices that think they have a better idea than what the others are proposing, which is the same reason why in like the 3 architecture firms I work for, I was part of the exact same development of CAD and BIM standards activity that every firm goes through because everybody thinks they have a better idea than somebody else's. Unfortunately, there's just not enough kind of collectivist view of how we should share knowledge and what we think the right solutions are. I'd love to see it though. I wish we could get
I think we see it in shades. Like you see it in 3D Warehouse. Like it's out there. You see it in gosh, I can't remember the furniture block person, but it's out there. It's just siphoned off. It's not cumulative for the entire anatomy of a building.
Yeah, I mean, you can even map like CAD standards travel from office to office as well. Like it happens. I mean, I think the fundamental wall against it I see is just that there aren't really incentives to do it, and you know, firms see a lot of the things that are most interesting and innovative are seen as proprietary and a competitive advantage. So what incentive would there be for, you know?
Just quickly to say, I think the best architectural design technologists by a significant margin are almost all in one company, and they are building that, and it's called HiPart. The only people that shut me the fuck up repeatedly are those guys, because there was nothing that they haven't thought through. And I think that Ian and those guys have thought so deeply about it. If you look at what they've done with HiPart Elements, they've thought through what it means to create a taxonomy. Extensible taxonomies in any ontological universe of information are extremely complicated. And I think that if you look through the difference between IFC and HiPart Elements, you'll have a lot of interesting answers. But they've thought about this stuff. It's a deep question. It's a great question, but I think there are solid answers out there.
It was a good question.
I will say, like, sharing stuff is actually more work than just not sharing it. Like, it takes extra work. I think that's fundamentally, like, we've tried open CAD BIM standards. We've actually done this before. We put it on our website. No one cared. Nobody wanted to maintain it. Done. No extra work. Well, right,
but even Wikipedia is curated. So who would curate this BIM information? No, my point though is that there's folks out there that have some inherent interest in doing it, whether it's just for the good of the world. I don't know you'll find a bunch of architects that want to have the perfect library of building information that will volunteer their time.
Argue the same about people wanting to know anything about anything in reality. Like, why is Wikipedia is because there are people who are interested in those topics who want to contribute.
It's exactly my point. So you could start it. Why do we have to start? If you thought it was a good idea, you could start it.
So I've got two examples that are, I guess, relevant to this. You mentioned one, which is Google Warehouse or whatever, SketchUp Warehouse now. And one actually was, we were talking to an architect today in Boston, and I guess Boston has an alternative maybe that works. And so SketchUp Warehouse, I mean, the issue is a model might be good, it might be really bad, right? Wikipedia is curated, but stuff might be right, and it might really not be right. So that's an issue if you're working with this kind of stuff, right? Boston has hired people, I think, within the city of Boston. They've modeled out the entire city. And when you, as an architect, submit for permit, you must submit a 3D model of your building. So they have split the work out. You're doing something in Boston, you get all of this accurate data, you submit, and it's a continually growing, updated system. And I mean, back to John's point a long time ago, I mean, there's government involved, right? And it kind of the whole system working together. Yeah.
Cool. This has been fun. I appreciate it. I've sat here and not said anything. That banner says Retooling AEC. You may have noticed I didn't pipe in about our call. This wasn't our call sales pitch. The purpose of this was like, I have these conversations with firms and you all have the same conversations. Let's just cut the shit. Let's get in here and let's all talk. And we may agree, we may disagree about certain things, but these conversations are what are really important. And I'm honored that you all did this. I really appreciate you doing it. And thank you all for the great questions. This has been great fun. Thank you.